Hello everyone, my name is Joe Olasino. I'm an account executive with CCSI, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Today, Matt Pascucci of CCSI will be discussing identifying risk in your organization before there's a cyber attack. And for those of you that aren't familiar with us here at CCSI, we've been in business since 1974, and our core competencies include infrastructure, which incorporates really the data center, IPT, wireless, data recovery, storage, virtualization, and hyperconvergence. Also security, which we're going to be discussing today, real-time breach detection, risk assessments, pen and vulnerability testing, DDoS solutions, secure mail, endpoint protection, and patch management. And from our cloud side of the house, we have solutions around migration, backup, disaster recovery, and cost containment. We also do application monitoring services. We're also an MSP, managed service provider, as well as an MSSP, managed security service provider. And we also provide third-party hardware maintenance offerings. So for any questions that anyone may have, please just place them in our WebEx chat. And I'd like to take this opportunity now and introduce you all to Matt Pascucci. Matt is responsible for running CCSI's security practice.
Thank you, Joe. So with that introduction, we're going to go a little bit into how to identify risks in your organization. So one of the big things that pretty much causes is if you don't know where your risks are, you can't really defend them. So we're going to really go into a little bit on vulnerability management and what that means for you, what that is, and how we can do that on a continual basis. So vulnerabilities are appearing at a record pace. We've seen vulnerabilities just creep up in every aspect of software, whether it be IoT, whether it be applications, third-party applications, operating systems, what have you. So software is just inherently many times insecure, and it's something that we're looking to go out there and understand how to protect ourselves from these insecurities so that we're not at risk going forward. So by doing that, we can really stop and contain the risks, but it's something that's more of a continual process that's more of a mindset that we'll see going forward. So this is something that we do continually. It's something that we're constantly searching for and identifying. So we'll get into these phases in a little bit, but why vulnerability management? So organizations must prioritize their vulnerabilities to reduce their risk. That's just a given. Many times what we'll see here, going to clients is that they really don't have an understanding of where they're vulnerable. And many times they don't even have an understanding of the systems that they have. And that's not, not uncommon. So, if we're going over this now and you're listening to that, it's not something to be shaming anyone or anything like that. It's right now that is an issue. Discovery, identification, vulnerability management just plays a key role in this process, in both this identifying assets and identifying where they're at risk. But continuous monitoring, you'll hear that word quite a bit, especially when it comes to compliance, is because NIST 800-137, that's a standard that we see like DFARS and a lot of other compliance agencies really just uphold it. PCI, NYDFS, the 23 NYCRR 500, that's DFS. They're taking this as no longer a one-shot approach where it's, here, I did a vulnerability scan, good luck, I did it for my, my annual. But a lot of these compliance and these regulations are moving forward so that they're forcing people to go out there and pretty much get a better security posture than they already have. So the more you do it, the better that your organization is, but you do have to follow up and remediate. So there is a life cycle to this, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But what they're trying to get at really is that you're only as good as your last vulnerability scan. So you might scan out there, you might do a review of all your assets, and then within 2 hours there's a 0 day somewhere that gets released to the public and everyone knows about it, and if you don't do another scan, you're going to look like you're good. So this is why the continuous process happens. So it's more of a proactive and not reactive approach. So this does affect your compliance. Compliance is a very large push for this. The compliance a lot of times drive security posture, but if you're going to do compliance, if you're going to let compliance drive your posture, you're only going to go down to the bare minimums of what compliance is going to do. So you really need to get an understanding of your data governance, understanding of where you want your posture to be. Is it going to be something that you're trying to keep up with your peers in your verticals? Is it going to be a compliance standard? Is it going to be, your own standard that you're going to develop internal in-house by using one of these frameworks? You really got to understand that. But either way, vulnerability management is going to fall in one of those groups. So adding context to other systems is another thing that vulnerability management does awesome. So, we have a SOC here. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified, and we use vulnerability management with our clients to pretty much inject into our SIM, into other systems that are going to allow greater contextual visibility. As an example, if we have a SIM and we have all the threats that we see coming through one of our clients, and we have their vulnerability data, we can overlay the two of them. So now we see a threat, pretty much going after one particular host or one particular, system on a network. If we have the vulnerability data on top of that, so if that attack is being used because there is an open exploit or threat to a system, that particular threat is escalated via priority because it's even greater of efficacy based off that threat. So the two of them kind of work in tandem, and vulnerability management data is a great way of just adding context to other systems. But this is a vulnerability management lifecycle. This is from Forrester. So Forrester actually goes out and they made this little icon here. I thought it was great, so we're using it. We're not rediscovering the wheel, and that's a bad dad pun. But what we're doing here is, there's 5 phases really. So discover, assess, report, remediate, and validate. So from the first phase to all the way to the last phase of validation, that is on a continuous basis. That's where we kind of are going over and over again and saying this has to be done, on a schedule, not just once a year. The once a year is, or whenever you feel like it, we need to have a schedule. And just really need to dig into that as much as possible. Some people's come back and they say, well, my life cycle is a year, and that's perfectly fine. You're going to miss a lot in a year. You're going to miss a lot in a week. And it's really dependent on resources, on how you can go out and get this life cycle as quickly as possible. I've worked in places where, and with clients where we did certain things every year, and then we did certain things every day. So it really was dependent on that. So we're going to briefly go over each one of these phases. And if there's any questions, just feel free to let me know. Shoot something inside the question box, and we will figure it out. So first phase, discover and identify. If you don't know it exists, you can't protect it. That is just common knowledge. So one of the first things we like to do is when we do, and not just we, this type of methodology is that we need to first understand what you guys, what you got in your network. If we don't know what it is, we can't protect it. If you don't know what it is, we can't protect it. So, the discovery and identification part of this is, us pretty much going in there, dropping a scanner into your network, dropping a tool into your network, or external facing, as we see here, is this could be done internally, externally. It could be done against applications, networks, endpoints, any operating system. So we need to understand where and what you guys have. And that is just and that's what I'm saying, we. If you want to do vulnerability management yourself, you need to understand it. But you need to know, where your assets are. That is huge, because if you don't know where your assets are, you can't classify them, and then you can't run vulnerability scans against those classification groups. So it's a big deal, and it's always the first step. And it's actually a good exercise to go through, because even if we didn't run any type of scans vulnerability-wise against them, a lot of times you just kind of figure out, being like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know we had all these new systems that were put on there. And it's a good way of just opening a little more visibility into what you actually have living on your network. But this is commonly done with a tool, as I said. And this function is built into almost every vulnerability management tool out there. The first phase is always go out there, always get understanding of what you have, come back, classify those assets, then use them as targets for vulnerability scans. So an example, we would go out there, we would set some IP ranges up if we're going to do this from an application, internal or network perspective, do a scan, come back, understand what they are. So we might have a couple hundred Windows servers, a handful of Linux servers, some random maybe AS400s, whatever. Come back, put those in groups, and then focus those groups towards vulnerability scans. So you don't really want to scan any Linux servers for Windows vulnerabilities, because it's going to be useless. You're going to get weird false positives and maybe even some issues on the servers themselves. So you want to be very close to the operating system or what you're scanning, because you want to kind of just get the efficacy of what's coming back, because there are false positives. There's always false positives on anything that we do, but we want to make those as limited as possible. And by doing that, you kind of reduce the risk of that happening. But vulnerability scans are created based off the discovery of assets, like we said, and this helps define those profiles, those risk profiles and those vulnerability profiles based off of the category, and it's going to help reduce those false positives big time. One of the things that we like to do and we recommend to do is to have the scans from the scanner performing the vulnerability scans authenticated, so that we can really just gather as much information as possible. So that goes both application and from endpoints. So if we are able to dig into the app or to the asset a little bit more, we are definitely able to get more information. So be careful when you do that, because you're going to get a lot of information back, and then it's going to come down to prioritizing. Prioritization and assessing is the next part in this wheel. So once you get those scans that are completed, the discovery and vulnerability, you need to go out, you need to work with your group or an MSSP like CCSI and really understand, what the heck is this report showing us? Those results are pretty much from the targets, right? So you need to understand what they're showing you. Is this even true? But before even doing that, you should really go through the results and determine if you got everything. So there's many times where you want to go out there and scan, I don't know, maybe you have a PCI range, and you're doing like a PCI type of vulnerability scan, but half of those systems are down, or they're doing patching at the time, or for whatever reason you can't access it. They're not going to show up in the vulnerability report, and they're going to potentially, assume that they're good. You can't do that. So we need to be able to go out and review the results from the reports, see if there was any outages, determine if for whatever reason maybe a scan caused an outage. It's very, 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 very rare that happens, but you can never say that you're touching another system in some way that it might not affect it in a adverse manner. But I'm just saying, extremely rare that does happen, but you need to have the ownership, because you're the one doing this, you're the one going out there, it's your responsibility, you're going to be leading this group, go out there, get an understanding of what it's doing. But from that, you're prioritizing, you're getting the understanding of your target groups, you're making your target groups. Maybe for whatever reason, you went out there and you need to just refine these groups a little bit more. So maybe you have a Windows all group, and now you have a PCI Windows group, and you don't want to scan them both at the same time, or you don't want to have cross-pollination in there. So this is where the assessing of the results and the prioritization of the results really starts coming into there. You're refining your program. There might be additional groups created for compliance that you don't want compliance scans to go into your quote-unquote security scans. I've seen people break them up. Many times we see compliance scans are a little bit more lenient, because they're just very prescriptive on what that compliance is looking for and nothing else outside of the box. But that is definitely needed for compliance, for PCI, for HIPAA, for those type of regulations. But from a security standpoint, you can go as deep as you want. And I would recommend using security as your driver, not compliance. If you go with security, compliance is just going to fall right behind, and it's just going to not even be an issue for you. So my opinion is to always go as hard as you can, and everything naturally from a compliance standpoint just kind of follows suit. But the prioritization of the findings, each report will need to have the findings prioritized. You just can't have random results thrown all over the place. You need to have the assets there by asset, with criticality. A lot of the times we want to take the criticality and base it off risk. So if you can go out and understand your high risk assets, then we can go out there and even do some math and get these tools to work properly. So if you have a high priority asset with a high priority risk, it's going to be higher on your list than a low priority asset with a high priority risk, if that makes any sense. But what we're looking to do is go out there, and you should also go out there when you're running these reports and getting understanding, knowing your environment, taking the risk level, which you kind of get from the criticality of the asset and the criticality of the vulnerability, and multiply those in that way to get a true risk review of that asset. One thing you should always keep in mind once we're looking at prioritization, because this is going to go a little more into remediation in a bit, but there are certain things that you need to look for, like maybe one particular patch, for an example, fixes 10 vulnerabilities. these are things where you might want to prioritize that one right away, even though it doesn't fix any, a large amount of things, but it will get in one big fell swoop where you can go in there and really make a dent to some of these vulnerabilities. So, work with the teams that are required. So a lot of times we see either the teams that are running the scans or us ourselves. We have to work with teams outside of the security team or outside of IT. So you might have a business development team who's running some type of app and you're scanning it. They have ownership of it, but you have ownership of the risk. So working between them, building that relationship between those teams, getting everybody on the same page is very, very important. One of the biggest things that we see here is, patching is always an issue. It's just always an issue. It always will be an issue. But we need to get ahead of it. We do have services here that will assist with that, but one of the larger ones outside of patching is misconfigurations. The misconfigurations on systems are probably the biggest vulnerability that we see. So it's human error, it's leaving something open, it's accidentally not understanding the risk that you have after you've made a change, and then just having it open and causing unwanted threats into your organization. So we do recommend that every time you make a change to your environment, to do a quick scan against it. Once you introduce change, you could introduce quite a bit into your network, even if you're trying to do it for the better. So we always suggest that from a prioritization standpoint and just from a pure process standpoint, if you make a change to your environment, whether it's good or bad or whatever it is, always do a quick scan against whatever you were just changing to make sure you did not introduce anything new. That is a big deal. So from a reporting and measuring perspective, you can't manage what you can't measure. So if you think you're doing a good job, that's not really good enough. You have to go out and understand that you need measurable reports, measurable ways of getting a better understanding of what you're doing in your environment, how you're progressing or how you're degressing. So if you're doing well, you want to show that. If you're not doing well, you need to figure out who's doing what and why aren't you hitting markers that you thought you would be hitting, or maybe there was something that caused something inadvertently. But either way, you need to be able to go out and measure that. Measuring and metrics are huge within security, especially within vulnerability management, because it's so easy to go out and get a good measurement of where you are if you consistently do this on a continuous basis. And it's great for that stuff. It's great to show management two things: one, that you're doing a great job, or two, you have some challenges that you need more assistance with. So these reports will be sent out there to engineering groups, to auditors especially. Auditors are going to come in, if you're in a regulated environment, they're going to want to see reports, and they want to see it from a continuous standpoint. So they're going to want to see, time-stamped reports from January 3rd. They're going to pull something out or whatever you guys have in your process procedures, and they're going to want to see something. So, we can do the time stamping on here, or the tools can do the time stamping on here. Your compliance, an example of PCI, they're going to want to see, from a financial standpoint, the banks and the credit cards companies, they want to see that you are doing and meeting compliance to keep your standing within the PCI Council. So those are things that you're going to have to do. And just management too, they're going to want to take a look at that. And you can disseminate these things to other places and other players, especially if they're going to be grouped. So if you're going to be doing some type of application scan and you want to send only application scan to the application developer group, that's definitely possible. But the secure delivery is also extremely important, because these are documents that we like to call are very, very toxic if they ever left the wrong hands, if they ever went to the wrong hands. So this is just a roadmap to where bad things are and how to exploit them. So you need to be able to be very careful with the delivery. These tools allow that. Be very careful on where they're sent and how they're sent. Make sure you can encrypt them as much as possible or store them in a safe place. But also when these findings are found, what occurs afterwards? What are your SLAs? You should have something internally as an SLA. Is a high priority asset with a high priority risk should be fixed in X amount of time, 48 hours, especially if there's exposure to the external internet. You want something out there, probably even quicker than that you can hold people accountable to with responsibility and ownership of who owns what. But these are things here. So the frequency of the scans can be adjusted. You got to create a schedule at one point. It always has to be on there. Either it's going to be a one-time shot or it's going to be scheduled, and you can kind of limit and make the elasticity of that scan, higher or lower. But you need to understand what's driving your compliance, what's driving your security. Compliance scans might be very prescriptive, but they say, I want to see this annually done X amount of times. Or you might say, that's not good enough for me. I need to make sure that I am continually and progressing in a secure manner. Either way, you need to adjust and make sure you have a frequency of scans that you are comfortable with from your organizational standpoint. So the remediation of risk. How to handle the remediation of identified risks. So there's a few ways you can do that. You can, one, accept the risk and do absolutely nothing, which is a completely valid response. It's just a very insecure response. Reviewing the underlying threat. So if there is a patch or there is a vulnerability that is caused because of a patch, fixing that patch will fix the risk. Or creating compensating control. So maybe you have a vulnerability out there on a web application and you put a web application firewall in front of it to stop it from being seen by the scanner and from people looking to do nasty things. The risk still lives on the system but is not exposed, so it's reduced, and you have a compensating control put in place to pretty much clean that up. Those are the three things that we deal with vulnerability management. Either accept it, you fix the underlying issue, or you put a control in place that's going to deny it from happening. Not everything is fixable, and not everything is considered a risk. So those things we need to go out through and prioritize and understand what that means. But having the ability to, as you said, integrate the vulnerability data into other systems for contextual data is huge. If you can do it, do it. It's a cost multiplier. It just helps in so many different ways by being able to just get additional value out of other systems, and making that integration automation is awesome. But the remediation needs to be managed. Don't take it for granted that you have a scan that's been done and that automatically those people that are responsible are going to go out there and clean it up. It just usually doesn't happen like that. You need to review the findings and remediate as much as possible, as quickly as possible, based off your SLAs. And as I said, this is always a process. It's not a one-time thing. I've worked and run programs in vulnerability management in the past, and it was just, this was part of life. This was a mindset. This wasn't something that we were checking a box. We're doing this because we're cleaning up the low-hanging fruit. If people are coming in here to exploit us, they're going to use some type of vulnerability, and doing this as a process is going to really reduce our risk massively. And using it for incident response for newly released vulnerabilities is not even just newly released, just vulnerabilities in general. So when WannaCry came out, there was one patch that didn't get applied, and it became a massive issue. How would you identify which systems to hit after that? So vulnerability management, if you're doing it and you're scanning appropriately, you can go out there and you can query which systems are open for that particular vulnerability, and then really identify and prioritize, then execute on what needs to be done. Running ad hoc reporting is very, very, very helpful. So we've done this, and I've done this in the past, and we'll get a little bit more into this now with the validation is, where were they reported? How were the risks discovered? Once that happens, we said, are you confident that they were fixed? And I said before, you need to trust that they were, but verify that the work was actually done. The compliance scans require validation many times. You don't want to leave a compliance scan that has any type of red in it. Any type of issue open means that you failed. So you need to consistently, with those compliance scans, make sure that you're good. Any risk means failure from a compliance scan. Many of these compliance scans need validation as proof. So you want to be able to go back out, and if you have, if you have an application or a system that has something on it, and then you have the app owner saying that it was fixed, you need to go back out, and you don't have to scan the entire application again like you did before as a full scan. You can go back and scan for just particular vulnerabilities that they were at risk to, which really quickens the pace, it quickens the findings, and it validates your efforts afterwards. So that's something that, the validation, huge. As I said before, AppSec and change control. Every time you do something, you make a change, you're always introducing risk. But if there is a change to something else, I would just scan for the change. I would scan for the issues that you're seeing within the applications. Looking for previous vulnerabilities. The full scans, as we said before, they could take hours at times if you're doing it for the first time. So we want to be able to go out there and really just accelerate what we're looking for, and that's where the validation comes back. So if there was 10 vulnerabilities on an application, after you're doing a full scan, you can come back and validate by just those 10, do a quick scan, be over very quickly, and then come back and saying, yes, we're good, or 2 of those still weren't fixed by the changes you implemented, we need to go back again. So you're kind of refining the wheel, constantly looking for these type of things. If that happens, you need to determine what the root cause is. Is there a developer maybe who just doesn't have an understanding of what it means to remediate particular, SQL injection vulnerabilities, or are there network admins who are just consistently opening up, risky rules? Like these type of things need to, after you've refined them, get a better understanding of why they keep occurring. And that's where you get more of the validation. But we as CCSI, we do offer this methodology as a service. So these are things that we do. So we identify and discover, we put hardware into your network if we need to, or software where we can scan. We also do it from an external standpoint if there's more of a compliance, or just curious if you have anything outside your network that people might be trolling by and looking at. These are things we could do from the cloud perspective to come and do quick scans against your network. We will assist with the prioritization of vulnerabilities. That removes the mundane work. So it's not difficult to set up vulnerability scans. It's kind of done, and then after within your network, you can kind of, put that on cruise control to a percent. You're always going to make some changes, but much of that work is done up front. The mundane issues are, prioritizing what was found, following up with the teams, going out and creating reports and keeping up on it. That's what we will assist with. That's our biggest value add here at CCSI, is being able to work with your teams and help you focus on what needs to be done to keep you secure. And with that, we develop runbooks and reports, so you get reporting. We're following that methodology. We'll assist with metrics and measurement. The remediation effort, we can assist with that depending on what needs to be remediated. So that's always just a more of a consultant engagement, but that is something that we have done and will continue to do with our clients to close the loop on this. And validation. So if there is an issue and we do have a vulnerability out there, we will come back and assist with validating afterwards that you said it's been cleaned up. Can you come back and please just make sure this is no longer there? So it is definitely something that we can do. CCSI offers this as a service. We also resell multiple vulnerability management tools. So these are things that we do. It's important, especially when it comes to compliance and all these other things as well. But we will provide the slides if requested. These are here. We can replay this. We can come in and speak with everyone that's on the phone right now. This is something that I've had a lot of experience with. CCSI has had a lot of experience with this, and it's such a critical part of a security posture that a lot of people, I think, take it for granted. I know I did in the past, and just getting involved with it heavily has been something that we really, really want to just make that as our service, make our services available to our clients. So we do have a couple questions that came in. So one of them being, how do you scan externally? So one of the things that we do externally is that we do have cloud service that we will scan from our side of the internet to wherever you are, and we can give you those results. Those results can be done scheduled, they can be done ad hoc, not an issue at all. So we will get what you need from that. If you need us to come internally for a one-time session, we can install systems, we can bring things on our drives and do quick scans like that. But I always recommend to have this done on a continual basis if necessary. We also have another question regarding what type of issues do we normally see and how do we remediate them. So what is going on is that we want to always look for misconfigurations. Like I said before, misconfigurations are a big deal. Patching is a big deal. So those two alone, I would say misconfigurations are probably 80% of where we see the nasty vulnerabilities come in. Patching is the low-hanging fruit, the other 20%. But that 20% is a lot wider than the 80%. So that is definitely something that we've seen and we recommend. So that's where the continuous monitoring comes into play. But those are the two we have.
Thank you, Matt. I actually had one more question here that I see, Matt. It was just a little bit, you had mentioned a couple times about the MSSP service.
Sure, yeah.
And it just wanted to know, like from a high level, could you discuss some of the different deliverables that CCSI offers?
Yeah, sure. So we will go in there, we will do a discovery of all your assets. We will come in there, like we said before, we're going to use this methodology and understand where everything lives, bring that report back to you to start with and saying, hey, these are the assets that we found. Do these make sense? You might say, I don't know half of those, so we need to really do this. Or you might say that we missed a few. And most of the time that is due to having network access that we don't have access to based off our scanner. So we work with your teams to make sure that our scanning tools have the accessibility to go out and find everything. Then we take that and we work with you guys to develop custom groups within the solution. So we put all the Windows in the Windows, we put all the Linux in the Linux, or we might say, okay, you're HIPAA. So there's certain critical systems that need to have a particular HIPAA scope or HIPAA vulnerability scan. So we'll focus it on that, and then we start scheduling those out. From that, we get the reports based off the schedule, and we take those reports, we prioritize them for you, and we create, depending on the service, either custom runbooks for us to alert you, or we have them just kind of delivered in a secure manner to you for you to review yourselves. The remediation efforts afterwards could be based off a block of hours that we have, so we can go in there and we can work based off of any type of maybe a misconfiguration from a network perspective, and we can go and kind of dig into your firewall for you a little bit and kind of figure out why and what the rule has to look like to change. And then we will do any type of validation that you require to make sure that those particular vulnerabilities are no longer existing in your network.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you everyone for your time today. I'll be following up with all the attendees to discuss next steps. Again, thank you and have a great day.
See you later.